Aimee at EuroLuxHome.com. Welcome back to our YouTube channel. If you enjoy learning about European antiques, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and maybe even share it with a friend who might also enjoy learning about European antiques. So welcome back to our series on how to tell if a piece of furniture is an antique. Today is part 2. And the answer is that really it's an art and science based on experience. And as an antique dealer for the past 20 years, I thought I would share my secrets on how I see age. It really is a combination of observation, research, knowledge about the historical nature of the styles of antique furniture, as well as construction techniques and materials. You really become a furniture detective or a sleuth, and you gather all of the clues and then weigh them to figure out what makes the most sense. And I will mention that you might want to check with an expert and get an opinion from a personal property appraiser. So last week, we looked at the style of identifying the style of your piece, because that's really the starting point. Once you've figured out the style, next you're going to take a little closer look at the materials that the piece is made out of. So different periods and styles favor different woods, and some materials were not commonly available until later periods of time. So that's part of why we're doing this, is figuring out how it all fits together. So it makes the most sense that when you're looking at furniture, you're going to start with the wood. And you'll want to identify what type of wood is my piece made out of. Because looking back to the 16th, 17th century, those styles mostly focused on oak. And then by the time you reached the 18th century, mahogany came into favor, and you'll also see a lot of walnut. And then there's also regional specialties. For instance, American colonial used the regional woods of cherry and pine, whereas the Brittany style almost always is made out of chestnut. So you want to take that into account. Now, does your piece have any veneers on it? And don't cringe and think that a veneer is a bad word. Louis XIV himself had amazing, beautiful furniture made out of veneers. All a veneer means is that you're taking a thin slice of wood and putting it over a substrate so that you can create a beautiful grained pattern. So you'll want to identify if you have veneers. Is it satin wood? Is it bird's eye maple? Is it mahogany, flame mahogany? Or like on this piece, this is book matched mahogany. Then, once you figure out what the veneer itself is, you're going to look at the thickness. So I'll pull out this drawer, because here's where you can see. So this is a book-matched mahogany veneer, and we see that the thickness here is really quite thick. Pieces that were from the 17th to the 19th century, most of the time the veneer is quite thick because they couldn't cut it as thin, so normally about 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm also noticing here that it's on solid oak. It's on a solid wood substrate. After the Industrial Revolution, once we move into the late 19th century, early 20th century, the veneer cutting techniques really advanced. And so you'll see much thinner veneer in newer pieces or younger pieces. And that substrate, I noticed that this piece, which is an antique, had that solid wood substrate. But on more modern pieces, you might find MDF or particle board or plywood behind the veneer. So you'll just want to figure out what is the substrate. That gives you another clue. Now, this particular piece is very heavy because it has this great big marble top. But that's something else to check. Kind of grab hold of the piece, lift it a little. Is it really heavy for its size, or is it generally a little lighter? Antiques in general tend to be heavier. Newer furniture in general is a little lighter, but that's not always the case. It's again just another clue that we write down in our little book, our detective book. Okay, so let's explore a little bit more. If you are at home with your piece, you're going to open the drawers, you're going to open the doors, you're going to look at the back. So for instance, over here this is a new piece. And so here it's mahogany all on the outside. I open it up and look, and here it's mahogany on the inside. Then when I spin it around, whoop, this one's kind of heavy, so I'm going to spin it around. The side is mahogany, but also the back is mahogany. So that's really a clue, because when a piece is made completely out of the same material everywhere, inside and outside, that is a clue that it really might be a new piece. Because newer manufacturing, it's much more disruptive to stop the line and use different woods. It's much easier to have the same wood on the line producing the pieces. So that's a clue for you. So here we know this is an antique piece, so let's explore it. Here we know on the outside was this book-matched mahogany veneer, and then when we look on the inside, this is actually oak. So it's a different wood on the inside than from the outside. And that's what we call secondary wood. So not the beautiful wood is on the outside, but a different secondary wood on the inside. Then I'm going to spin this for you so you can see the back. Because looking at the back is definitely something that you want to do when you're trying to figure out age of a piece. So one, you're just looking to see, does it look old? But two, I see that this is an oak back. So that's giving me another tip that I have a different wood used on the back than from the front. So I'll turn that back around. So another clue for me. So you'll look in the hidden areas of the piece, the backs, the drawers, the shelves. Are they pine? Those are good indications that maybe it's an antique. Again, it's not just one clue, it's a whole combination of putting all the clues together. So let's talk about plywood, because sometimes people think, oh, if it has plywood, then that means that it's a new piece. And that's not true, because plywood was actually used in ancient Egypt, dating all the way back to 1500 BC. So plywood, what is plywood? What it is you take sheets of veneer and you alternate them at right angles. So you're stacking the veneer and then you glue them together. And nowadays we put them under heat and pressure. And what it does is it really creates a very strong substrate. It's actually stronger than solid wood. Now, plywood began to be used in the late 19th century in furniture production, a little bit, but then with the Industrial Revolution, we had better adhesive technology and cutting technology, again, veneer cutting technology to make those stacks. But really by the early to mid 20th century is when we start to see widespread use of plywood. So that's another tip to kind of add in to your mix. And again, plywood is valued for stability. It's less likely to split or crack, and it is quite cost effective to use as a secondary wood. Now, mid-century modern style and Scandinavian design frequently used plywood. So that's a way to date check those styles because it creates a very smooth surface on which to put beautiful veneer on top. And it has great ability to be molded. The Eames chair, which is one of the signature hallmarks of the mid-century modern style, used that molded plywood to create that curvy shape of the chair. And plywood is still widely used today, as well as other engineered woods like MDF, or medium density fiberboard. So if you find MDF in a piece, then that's an indication that it is a newer piece. So that was wood. We looked at the wood first in order to get our clues. The next material that we're going to look at is glass or mirrors. So if you have a piece that has glass doors, a great tip is kind of to come and look from the side and see if you see a wave to it. You should be able to see this really nice wave and maybe even some little air bubbles in the glass itself. That's an indication that it's older glass for the most part, because there is such a thing as restoration glass, which mimics the look of antique glass, but it still doesn't quite have that real waviness that antique glass has. So that would be an indication of age. And then as you look at mirrors, again, as technology has changed, the process of making mirrors has changed. So that helps us date something. So a mirror dating before 1830, 1840, is a piece of glass, and then the back side was painted with or lined with mercury, and that's how you made that reflective surface. When pieces with mercury on the back get old or they age, they look cloudy or hazy or foggy, has kind of a specific look to it. Whereas mirrors that are after 1840s, the backing substrate was they used silver nitrate to create that reflection on the back of the glass. Now, silver nitrate ages a little differently than the mercury does. More often you see spots, like little age spots all over the mirror, or maybe sort of like a crystalline pattern of like little tiny little hairline cracks, or maybe it's actually flaking off and there's pieces of where it doesn't even have the mercury or the silver nitrate there anymore. So there's a difference between the mercury and the silver nitrate as the mirror reflective layer on the back and how it ages, so that you can date a piece earlier than 1840 or later than 1840. Now, another really cool tip is to do what's called the finger test or the gap test. And that's where you come and you put your finger right next to the mirror. Now, here, because this is an antique mirror, I can actually see a pretty good distance. It looks like maybe ½ an inch between where my finger stops and where I can see the reflection of it in the mirror. Now try that with your mirror in your bathroom at home, and most likely you'll see it looks like your fingers touching exactly. So on this mirror it looked kind of like a gap, whereas at home it might look exactly like that. And again, that has to do with how thin they're able to cut the glass for the mirror. And modern techniques are much likely to be much thinner, and so that's where you are able to see your finger just touching in the mirror. That's an indication of newer mirror or newer glass. Now, we also have marble as a material, and so something that you'll want to do is just kind of run your fingers along the edge of the marble here where it's used. And what you're looking to find are little tiny flea bites, just little tiny chips along the edge that you could feel with your fingers. Sometimes you can see them, sometimes not. But those little tiny flea bites are an indication of age, because if you have pristine marble with no flea bites whatsoever, then you really know that that marble has been replaced, most likely, and it's not an antique piece of marble. You might also look to see if there's any repairs, any evidence of old repairs. And really, as an antique dealer, there's certain colors and grading patterns of marble that I expect to see. And when it's a different color or pattern that I'm not used to seeing, it makes me question if that is truly an antique piece. And again, that comes with experience. And the final material that you'll want to check out is, does it have natural or synthetic materials on the piece? And by that I mean, for instance, is there bakelite on the piece? Bakelite was one of the very first plastics that were created in the 20th century. And it often looks like mother of pearl. And it was used as decoration on a lot of things, including furniture. So if you see bakelite, then that's a tip right away. You know that it's a 20th century piece. But if you look at the upholstery, older upholstery would use wool or silk or cotton versus newer upholstery would have synthetic fibers. Now again, the upholstery could have been changed, so that's not always the most accurate method, but it's something to consider. So I hope that I'm impressing upon you that there's a lot of different aspects that you take into account when you're determining if a piece of furniture is truly an antique, that how old that you think it is. It really requires a lot of study and experience handling a lot of different antique pieces that you know are truly antiques. So I suggest going to antique stores, going out to antique shows so that you're actually putting your hands on a lot of different pieces and getting familiar with what true antiques really do look like. Read lots of books, go to online resources, do lots of study, and then of course learn by asking questions. Most antique dealers are happy to answer questions for you if you really are trying to learn about what makes an antique truly an antique. I hope that you've enjoyed this Step 2, our second episode in our series on how to tell if a piece of furniture is truly an antique. Be sure to come back next week as we'll continue on with learning all of the clues on how to figure out how old something is. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and maybe even share it with a friend who would also like to learn about telling how old something is. See you next week.